In the last months of 2021, the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, known more commonly as COP26, was held in Glasgow, Scotland, bringing together world leaders from across the globe to discuss an issue that is taking hold of the planet. On the surface, the objectives of this conference seem to be fairly strong. COP26 continued to push a goal of not allowing Earth's temperature to increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius, a limit set by the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015 that would prevent the worst impacts of climate change from ever taking place. To accomplish this, COP26 saw nations openly talking about fossil fuels like coal and oil for the first time, as well as addressing the issue of methane gas, which is as much as 36 times more impactful in heating the atmosphere than the carbon dioxide emitted by fossil fuels. And yet, upon looking deeper, one finds that things in Scotland weren't always so optimistic. Thousands of protesters descended upon the city, arguing that COP26 didn't go nearly far enough to actually achieve the lofty goals it was outlining. Youth activist Greta Thunberg led the charge, calling out what many feel is a system incapable of real progress.
Many are starting to ask themselves, what will it take for the people in power to wake up? But let's be clear, they are already awake. They know exactly what they are doing.
Not only did COP26 fail to take any radical steps that might contribute more significantly to combating climate, the conference also lacks any kind of enforcement mechanism to ensure that countries keep up their pledges and promises. Many observers have also noted the hypocrisy of the lavish event, where speakers fly in on private jets and landmarks are rented out for luxurious parties, fueling the kind of consumer system that some blame for harming the climate. With COP26 looking like a failure by most accounts, why do we hold climate conferences like this, even if everyone, including the dignitaries in attendance, know that they won't actually lead to very much change? The road to COP26 began in Stockholm in 1972, when the first ever United Nations Scientific Conference was held, with guidelines outlining a responsibility to preserve the environment and prevent issues like pollution. Since that time, global climate change has become a far more serious issue, prompting a steady stream of conferences with the goal of resolving it. The most recent major landmark, the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015, committed to reducing all carbon emissions to net zero by the end of the century, and sooner if possible. Despite the optimism surrounding these agreements, we're still grappling with crisis, suggesting that Paris might not have been as strong as we'd hoped. And yet, we continue to have climate conferences like COP26. Why? Well, one explanation might lie in a different global crisis. In the 1980s, a hole in the Earth's ozone was discovered, caused by harmful chemicals released by human products, like refrigerators and aerosol spray cans. If allowed to expand, this hole would have increased the incidence of skin cancer, damaged crop growth, and disrupted the marine food chain. 1987's Montreal Protocol was the international meeting tasked with addressing this issue, and unlike COP26, countries took quick and radical action, completely banning the harmful chemicals that hurt the ozone. Recent studies now show that the hole stopped its rapid growth shortly after the Montreal Protocol was adopted, and is now steadily shrinking, on track to be wholly repaired by 2050. The Montreal Protocol is solid, scientifically supported proof that international conferences can make a difference. The problem is, climate change doesn't have the same kind of easy fix that the ozone had. Unlike individual products like spray paint and fridges, climate change is caused by vast systems that are founded on emitting greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is released when fossil fuels are burned to generate the electricity that powers everything, from heating your home to the screen you're watching this on now, as well as when they fuel the planes, trains, and automobiles that move you from place to place and deliver you goods manufactured overseas. Methane gas is released through the digestive processes of cows, making beef farming a major culprit in spurring on climate change, as are the major quantities of methane released from the landfills housing our waste. Systems like energy, transportation, and agriculture are essential to human civilization, and don't have the same kind of easy fixes that the ozone layer did. Countries' entire economies depend on these things, making any attempts at changing the system unpopular with the people in power. Of course, there are alternatives to these processes. Innovative technology like solar and wind power, biofuels, and plant-based meat can easily address some of the greatest concerns we're facing. However, to switch over to these new technologies is a costly process, even if that technology is already proven effective. Economists estimate that taking action that will achieve the Paris Climate Agreement's goals will cost more than $12 trillion over just the next 25 years alone, which costs more than 300 times as much as the entire Montreal Protocol ever will. This astronomical cost is why, despite the best intentions of many countries, climate change still isn't any closer to a real solution. One estimate from this year suggests that relatively green countries like Germany, Japan, and the UK are currently only paying around 40% of their fair share in combating climate as outlined by the Paris Accords, while other countries like the US and Australia are paying as little as 5% of what they should be. This is proof that the Paris Climate Agreement is currently way off track from achieving its lofty goals. And remember, COP26 was the first of 26 global conferences to openly address fossil fuels in its language, and is only now starting the process of phasing out coal. International conferences like these might seem nice on the surface, but on the inside, they're really empty. This all doesn't mean that international conferences are pointless, though.
I think whenever you talk about are they successful, it in large part depends on what you're defining as success. If you want concrete enforcement mechanisms, they're not there, and they really haven't ever been. So certainly not successful in terms of establishing a goal in a concrete way to hold a country to its pledged targets or goals. But in terms of does it move the needle, I think it does.
That's the voice of John Parks, an ecologist and professor of environmental studies at Washington University in St. Louis. Parks recognizes that there's much more to climate conferences than just the policy itself, and that it is in the margins where we might find value.
I think they are really important in terms of kind of driving the narrative both in and outside of politics. So if you think internationally, whenever you can bring people together to talk about things, I think that matters. And I think it helps to spread ideas, awareness of issues and problems, and also ideas about how to fix it. And when you have people coming together and talking about things like that, I think that is productive, even if the targets or the concrete goals that come out of it are sometimes unsatisfying. I think the conferences do serve a purpose. If you look over time, you see the ideas that get talked about at those conferences kind of filter into the discussion over the next X number of years. And some of those will start to be implemented maybe within a country, or even sometimes with a city may start to think about some of those things. So, 1.5 degrees is a target that sticks. I mean, that's what people are thinking about. And even in terms of public awareness, you think about the amount of coverage of COP26, the amount of talk about climate, articles written about climate. So I think that also goes a long way to kind of help overall awareness with the public.
In reality, COP26 serves a purpose as a media event that both re-emphasizes the urgency of climate change to the public and purposefully points out the hypocrisy of the ritzy heads of state who don't go far enough to stop climate change. By having repeated check-ins on progress, leaders are publicly shamed for shirking, incentivizing them to take the actions to help climate that they might not if we weren't constantly checking up on them. The goals set at climate conferences are also important, because the higher they get, the more embarrassing inactivity becomes, pulling countries along as goals get higher. These conferences also set goals that enterprising local governments can strive to. While this certainly isn't the radical change that activists hope for, it's still better than a world where there are no climate conferences, and leaders aren't ever called to answer for their mistakes. So, did COP26 finally slay the dragon of climate change? Not even close. But it did serve a purpose. Climate change may be the defining issue of our time, and it can often feel infuriating that the steps our leaders are taking are so small. Just remember, though, that without conferences like COP26, you wouldn't know that you should be infuriated. And that's why climate conferences matter. You might not be saved, but at least now, you're angry about it.